Okay, great. Thank you, Lisa. Welcome to the first session after the plenary on the geopolitics of shale. I think it should be better entitled Geopolitics of Energy, where we'll be looking at what the unconventional revolution, or the so-called shale and tight oil and gas development in the United States has meant in terms of the U.S. market, for its geopolitical status, and the impact that this has on the region in East Asia, or Asia writ large, as well as the world. Hopefully we can do this all in under 1 hour and 15 minutes. Before I go and jump straight into the discussion, I want to introduce today's speakers. We have a fairly experienced, well-seasoned experts on topics related to energy. We're very lucky to have all these four individuals here in one room. So I don't want to waste too much time in giving you the full bio, but I just want to highlight who these individuals are and what they do. And if you want to know more about them, I would invite you to come approach them after the discussion to follow up on whatever it is that you wanted to ask or hear more about from each of them. To my immediate left is Professor Philip Andrew Speed, Dr. Philip Andrew Speed, from National University of Singapore, where he is the head of the Energy Securities Division and Energy Studies Institute. Previously, he was the professor of energy policy at the University of Dundee, and the director of Center of Energy, Petroleum, and Mineral Law and Policy. He's written several books related to energy, and he has quite a bit of a wealth of knowledge on East Asia. To his left is Professor Chen Wei-dong. He's the chief energy researcher at CNOOC, Energy Economic Institute's Office for Policy Research. He has worked in the China Oil Field Services as executive vice president. He was the secretary of board of directors. He's very, very knowledgeable in terms of the landscape of the energy industry in China. To his left is Mr. Ed Chow, who is a senior fellow at the Energy and National Securities Program at CSIS in Washington, D.C. He has over 35 years of industry experience working in all over the world. I mean, I guess it's better to look at where he hasn't worked in. It looks like he's worked almost everywhere. He's spent 20 years in Chevron as well, so he has a very good understanding of the energy industry in the United States and the world as well. Lastly, but not least, Mikhail Herberg, who is the research director of the National Bureau of Asian Research's Energy Security Program. And he's also jointly listed as a senior lecturer at the Graduate School of International Relations at University of California, San Diego. He's also had over 20 years of experience working at ARCO. He knows about this all of these guys are basically experts when it comes to this area of research. So they can pretty much handle anything you throw at them, which means you shouldn't hold back in terms of questions that you might have related to what is going on in the United States. So instead of doing a sort of a typical, opening 2 minutes, 5 minute discussion where, speakers might talk past each other, I thought I'd sort of, grab hold of this discussion a bit and direct the question so that the discussion stays focused on the issue that we care about, which is first and foremost, and this is a question that I often get from my colleagues as well who are investing in this particular sector in the United States. What, in terms of the so-called unconventional revolution in the U.S., what does this look like? What are we talking about here? Is this something that's sustainable as we go forward? We're hearing some rumors that, the data coming out that's production in certain shale plays like Haynesville and Barnett, maybe the productions are going down or have tapered off. Does this mean that this is not sustainable for over 100 years, as some people are saying? I mean, I guess the first person that I'd like to sort of direct this question to give us some sort of a perspective on the size and the scope of what's going on in the U.S. Mike, you want to give us a sort of your view about this?
Sure. Thank you, James. If I can operate under the lights here. It's a hot spot here. Let me just try to provide some kind of perspective on the scale of the shale tight oil revolution in the U.S. If you start about 2008, 2009, after 40 years of secular decline, U.S. oil production has increased by well over 4 million barrels a day in the space of just 7 years. Now over 4 million. And if you throw in Canadian oil sands increases, the North America kind of wide consideration, you end up with 5 million barrels of incremental new supplies over the last 6 years or so. I mean, think about that. That's equivalent to Kuwait and United Arab Emirates combined total daily oil production, the two together. It's 1 million barrels more than Iraqi capacity is aspiring to, or the Iranians. So these are big numbers, enormous scale of increased production. That has backed out 5-6 million barrels a day of U.S. imported oil consumption. Went from 12 million barrels a day to 7. And all that oil has backed up into the global market and driven all the competition for market share towards Asia. And I'll talk about that in a second. Let me talk a little bit about the gas side, because this is kind of a two-pronged revolution. Shale gas production due to fracking technology over the last 6 years has risen 15-fold. It's gone from about 1 billion cubic feet per day to something like 20+ billion cubic feet per day. The U.S. has surpassed Russia in 2009 as the largest natural gas producer in the world. Again, enormous scale of increase. Just to give you some perspective, the Marcellus gas field, which is in Pennsylvania, New York area, mainly Pennsylvania, 7 years ago produced almost no natural gas. Today, it's the largest single natural gas producing field in the world. It's bigger than Qatar's North Dome field. It's bigger than any of the large West Siberian Russian gas fields, individual production. I mean, this kind of thing doesn't happen in an industry like this where things tend to move very slowly. The U.S. is going to be an exporter of natural gas in the form of LNG in a pretty big way, primarily probably to Asia, which is good for Japan. It's great for South Korea, all the big LNG consumers out here. So you've seen just a really unbelievable reversal and surge in production. Just a few market comments. Obviously, that's eaten into OPEC and particularly Saudi Gulf producers' market for crude oil, because all this oil backed out of the U.S. has to find a home. It's all converged on Asia, and that's where the price declines hit in the middle of last year because of the competition for market share in Asia. We've seen prices basically cut in half. Now, how durable is this shale or tight oil production in the U.S.? It's a very short cycle kind of investment, so it's different than these long, large offshore fields. Wells are drilled in a matter of a few months. They produce for a year and a half at really high rates and then deplete extraordinarily quickly. So you got to keep drilling and drilling and drilling. It's like a treadmill, not like the traditional industry. So as prices come down, drilling rig count has been cut in half. Investments have been cut back in the U.S., the North American oil patch. And you're gradually seeing net increases in production will gradually be outweighed by net decreases in legacy wells that were drilled last year and 2 years ago. It's a net kind of thing. So that's going to roll over in the next few months. And you're going to get the growth in U.S. production will cap out at about 700,000 this year when it was expected to be well over 1 million. And that's the effect of these lower prices. However, there's an enormous backlog of wells that can be produced very quickly. We're calling it the frack log, the backlog. And this is a very resilient The technology is improving, costs are coming down. So the cost structure for tight oil production is coming down very quickly in response to lower prices. And so the impact is much less than we kind of expect. It's much more resilient. So if you ease prices back up into the 60s, maybe low 70s, you're going to see a lot of this come back. So OPEC and the Saudis have a long-term challenge on their hand. They're trying to turn U.S. tight oil production into the new swing producer. So the U.S. production would go up and down with prices, and the Saudis can escape this role as swing producers and make the U.S. tight oil producers be the global swing producers in the future. We'll see whether that works, and I'll kind of stop with that and not run too far on time.
I mean, it sounds like, it's truly a revolution in terms of the scale and scope. We're feeling some of the impact of this in terms of the gasoline prices at the pumps, for instance, for the average consumer. That's one market implication from this. Ed, I wonder what you might think about this from the sort of the market point of view. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? Well, you heard Mike just say, OPEC is trying to deal with this challenge in its own ways. Will OPEC succeed, or is it really OPEC, or is it just Saudi Arabia? It seems like OPEC's not really working together on this, at least. Does that mean that OPEC is at a critical juncture here, a critical moment? Do we have a potential for some negative impact that OPEC's going to have as a result of this? I wonder what you think, based on your understanding and your experience, about the market impact and the market implications of this.
Thank you, James. I guess it's a good thing if you're a consumer. It's not as good a thing if you're a producer. And since most of us are consumers of energy, it's generally speaking a good thing for the global economy. Just to respond to your question, but just to underscore what Mike's already said about why this is such a revolution. What we need to understand is the shale gas revolution allows us to tap the source rock from which oil and gas migrated from in conventional production, which means the resource base has now been expanded multiple fold. The other reason why this is resilient is that we're still in the early days of this revolution. Ryan Lance, the CEO of ConocoPhillips, likes to say that we're still in the first inning of a 9-inning baseball game. And someone said, well, aren't we at least in the second inning? But the point is that this is still early days. The technology will improve. Costs will come down. Recovery rates are relatively low, say 6 to 8%. So you're able to increase your recovery rate by 1 or 2% over a much larger resource base. It can keep going for quite a long time, depending on the price of oil. You produce a certain amount at $65, and you could produce a lot more at $80. So this is truly a revolution. I think from a Saudi point of view, or a OPEC producer that is in a similar situation as Saudi Arabia, which would be one of the major Persian Gulf producers, $100 oil was never a very good thing in the long run. If you have multiple decades of oil reserves in the ground, the cheapest oil in the world to produce, the last thing you want to do really is to have prices that are so high that it leads to energy efficiency improvement, leads to alternatives coming in, being more economic at a higher oil price, and with the climate change uncertainties, policy uncertainty around the world, you don't know whether your reserves on the ground would be worth 80 years from now. So $100+ oil, which is unprecedented in both real and nominal terms. In the 155-year history of the modern petroleum industry, the average real price of oil is about $35 or lower than that. So even $60, $65 oil is not necessarily cheap oil. But so the Saudis had a nice run with $100 oil. If you're a producer, you enjoy high prices, driven more by, I would submit, since 2010, by political uncertainty than fundamental supply and demand factors. And so having a lower price of oil that would slow down the growth of unconventionals in the United States and maybe around the world eventually, is in the long-term interest of Saudi Arabia, assuming that you can overcome the short-term budget crises. Now, and people forget, that Saudi Arabia ran persistent budget deficits from the mid-1980s until the late 1990s. So the Saudis have lived through this sort of thing before. They're very experienced oil people, and I think they are behaving in terms of protecting market share, protecting the long-term interests of the resource that they have under the ground in a pretty smart way.
Well, it sounds like a good thing from consumers' point of view, again. But what about China, Chen Weidong? What's the impact of all this, if any at all, in terms of China's market, and your views about what impact it would have for the greater Asian market, if any at all?
Yeah, the U.S. shale gas revolution, including the tight oil, also can say a kind of revolution. It's really make a big impact for China, even the whole world. I view America shale gas revolution in 4 levels impact the world, including China. First of all, is increase the production, not only the shale gas, also the tight oil, just like Mike says. That totally changed the whole picture of the energy of the world. The low oil price up today actually impact initially by the shale gas revolution. Second, I think is expansion, the understanding of the knowledge of oil gas resources. Before, we recognize only the reserve, the conventional oil field and gas can produce oil and gas. But now, the shale actually is kind of resources catching of the oil and the gas. They can produce as well. Yeah. Third things is really impact the industry structure. Michael also said, because the turnover time is very quick. You drill, you produce, no exploration period. Yeah, no develop period. Exploration is develop is production. So that can attract more of the finance industry to involve. Before, the conventional oil company, their asset ratio control below 30%. But now, lots of American small and medium oil company, they drive in the revolution. Their debt ratio can 70, 80, even higher. So also that allow many of non-oil industry can involve in. They are more looks like now the manufacturing similarity, not the traditional anymore. And there are 4 things I think make a big impact for the whole society is the oil and the gas. The gas price is linked with the oil price that American achieved. Before 2007, American gas price also linked with the oil. The whole world similarity in that time. Once MMBTU as high as $13 in 2007, but now only about 4 or even below.
250.
250, yeah? That's the only major consumer country they link oil and gas. Now it's linked with the coal. U.S. gas price linked with coal. That gave China government a very big impact. So the Chinese government enforced the three major to go to the invest on the shale gas. Yeah, like he just visited. Now China has become the second largest shale gas driller. Already over 400 wells has been drilled. And the second largest shale gas produced country. Last year is about 1.2 billion cubic meter, 550 times, 5.5 times as the year before the shale gas revolution, the shale gas productions. So it's really become a very hot.
So China's catching on, and it sounds like it's impacting China in quite significant ways. But what about Southeast Asia, Phil? I know you have some.
Just a couple of parochial comments. Southeast Asia, I think at the moment, the main impact is that the low oil prices has allowed governments steadily or quite rapidly to remove or reduce subsidies, consumer subsidies on energy. So for them, it's not just an economic boom because prices are lower, but they can actually address budget deficits by reducing subsidies. So I think that's really interesting. Another parochial from my European origins is that now that the US is using all this gas, you're shoveling all your coal over to us. And I don't think my green European colleagues are very happy about it. So those are two trivial market implications.
Well, I think that gives us a very good understanding about sort of the market implications in North America, globally, and also, I mean, it's not a complete view, but it does give us a fairly good picture about what this means. But what about the geopolitical implications, or if we missed anything? Mike, do we miss anything on the market that, if not, then, what do you think about the geopolitical implications?
Well, I guess a couple things. The theme of the conference is, is the U.S. back? And I think this enormous explosion in cheap energy supplies, particularly gas, $2.50, $3, 1,000 cubic feet. Remember, the Europeans are paying close to $10, and much of Asia has been paying $16 for that same amount of gas. This is an enormous benefit for U.S. manufacturing, petrochemical industries. You've got petrochemical companies in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia investing in petrochemical production in the U.S. now, which is backwards. This should be, that's totally reverses the traditional pattern. So U.S. industry has been strengthened, competitiveness. It's great for the U.S. economy. Whether the U.S. is able to marshal this into a diplomatic geopolitical advantage is another question. We're not set up to do those kinds of things. I think it's given us latitude in taking Iranian oil off the market with sanctions and some other things because the market impact has been minimal because we've had all this excess supply. But I think we're not using it very effectively as a diplomatic tool.
Because the industry itself it's not run by the state. It's basically market driven.
Yeah,
right?
And so it's terrifically beneficial to the economy, strength of the economy, and geopolitically that's an important counter, part of your base load of your geopolitical leverage. But our active use of it as a diplomatic lever has been less than useful from my perspective.
How about you, Phil? What's your view on this?
I'd like to pick up something, the word that wasn't used in the first session that we just had, that I think, pity Jim Steinberg isn't here because he almost used it, and that was the word soft power. And I think if you look at science, and particularly the industrialization of science in America, not necessarily the invention itself, you go back electricity, telephones, the motor car, IT, we all looked to America, maybe after the fact, but America was the place that industrialized and produced whatever stuff it was at scale. And I think, this arguably is the first major step since the IT revolution where you could say this approach, this technology, or this combination of technologies was made in America, and now everybody once again is looking at America. We all want to be American, well, sort of, at least when it comes to shale. That's where we are looking, and I think it's soft power, but I think it's important, and actually the government is realizing it in a very marginal way. I mean, there's a special US-China shale gas sort of get-together that may or may not do something useful, but as we were saying, to start with, any forum that gets China and the US together talking about a shared interest is good. So I think, under the ground there is soft power, that America is still there, as Jim was saying, as a technological leader. And I think this is important, at least for your esteem, if not for everybody else's.
So
James, if I may make two
feel
factual
free.
observations that may have a geopolitical import. One is our fundamental oil and America's fundamental oil and gas supply situation is positioned as a country whose oil imports are declining rather than increasing, as previously expected. The prospect of America becoming very soon a net gas exporter rather than an importer puts us in a very divergent position than our traditional allies in NATO, as well as our traditional allies in Asia, namely Japan and Korea. So that's one observation. The other observation, which I think haven't been noted enough as part of this, is that China is now today's world's largest oil importer. It passed the United States last year. And that's something that we didn't expect to happen so soon. China is going to be increasing its gas consumption from a very low base over the next several years. That's the government's objective for lots of reasons, including environmental reasons. And where's that gas going to come from? It's either going to come from increased domestic consumption, that is a combination of tight gas, shale gas, coal-bed methane, and so on, or it's going to come from increased imports. Depending on the success of China on tapping into the unconventional gas revolution, it may have a huge impact on the global gas trade in the future if the present plans continue, just as it had such a huge impact in the oil price market up until 2008. So that's just a couple of factual observations that would have geopolitical implications.
Well, factual observations that have some dark undertones to it, I think. And you're saying that the U.S. is in a different position in terms of its interests than its allies. So we got the dark, and we got the light, which is Philip sort of seeing the positive aspect of this in terms of the U.S. global positioning and its soft power. And Mike's view, which is kind of like in between. So we got the light, the middle, and the dark. But what about from China's point of view? Is this a good thing or a bad thing from a geopolitical standpoint?
First of all, I say the U.S. gas revolution both have good and bad things for Chinese impact, but mostly it's a good thing. Being energy economic observer, researchers, I've looking closely, China, U.S., China, Russian, and the China, Middle East, say, very close look at. Only recently, a few years, the negotiation between China and Russia, China gained a little more power. Before, we be a pure buyer. We really looking the supply from Russia, but they are really ignore our request. Hu Jintao, 10 years in the position, visited Russia 5 times. 5 times, none any contract has been signed. But you see last year, yeah, Putin signed with the big contract with Xi Jinping.
That's right.
And then maybe next month another big contract will be signed. That's really impact due to the American shale gas revolution and also the confliction, Ukraine crisis, and also in Saudi. Today, this time, actually, Saudi oil minister is in China, have a meeting like this with the Chinese expert. That very seldom, because now they're really Russia, Middle East, they compete the market in China.
That's right.
Yeah, in China. So that also is very big geopolitical impact, because the energy transactions, very big changes. So how will be more impact? I don't know, but will be heavy later on. In the planning of Chinese government, by 2020, shale gas local production will be reached to 30 billion cubic meter per year. That's about a 10% our consumption that time. Also, China will become a really multi-gas resource hub in, Northeast Asia. We get pipeline from Central Asia. Now it's 3 billion cubic meter per year, but maybe double. 30 billion. Yeah, 30 billion. And we have the East Route. It's the Russian-China pipeline. It's about 38 billion cubic meter. And also now it's talking about the Western route of the Russian gas pipeline to China. It's about 30 billion. And we already built up 12 LNG download station. Average, 30 million ton each. And we have a local conventional and conventional CBM production. And very unique, China has their so-called coal to gas coal to gas production. That's only in China. So China become a very multi-source coming hub in the area. Now the Chinese government become more concerned about how the gas can be consumed by 2020. About 400 cubic meter. Yeah? We become, maybe the price is very different. Now in China, 1 MMBTU coal is about $3, $2 to $3. But 1 MMBTU gas over 10, average over $10. So the high price slow down, the consumption grows. China is now become very, controversy on the gas, the situation. We only 6% on our energy mix of our gas, 6%, lowest in the world. But we already the third largest gas consumption country, but the gas slowed down to consumer growth. So that how that will impact, really not clear. Also, it will depend on how the world price, the oil price, or how they link the oil and the price, especially LNG. Or Japan, Korea. Japan, Korea, China, Taiwan, over 70% LNG world the world, 70% LNG consume this area.
Right.
But LNG become the most expensive gas in the world. So how that will be, how the picture can be changed, really unclear for me at least. Maybe some expert here.
Well, before we keep going on this, because this is a really fascinating discussion, if the audience has any questions, just feel free to raise your hand and I could call on you. We have a question here, Ambassador from Australia.
Well, thanks very much. You'd expect an Australian ambassador to ask the question, having gone through the shale gas revolution, what is the future of large offshore gas reservoirs? I also was struck by this comment about that you picked up, Chairman, about a divergent position with allies in Asia, whether there was something sinister in this. I would argue that the emerging situation offers Asian countries a wealth of choice. A country like Korea, the bulk of gas is coming from Qatar. By later this decade, Australia will be a much bigger player in that mix. But then if the US begins to export LNG, there's going to be a wealth of alternatives. It'll be a highly competitive market. So I'm not sure I see much dark side. I would have thought it looks extraordinarily promising for the energy-dependent economies like Japan and Korea in particular. But I would be interested in views of the panel on the future for conventional, if you like, LNG, where you have large capital costs. And I'm also struck that with shale gas, you have short-termism, as we're talking about, and low capital costs. But over the life of a shale gas field, your capital costs, I guess, are amortized over the life of the field. But overall, they may not be that much different than an offshore reservoir.
Just to clarify, my comment was essentially that, what high price means from a consumer's point of view is not the same thing from a producer's point of view, and vice versa for the low price. So, Mike and then Ed, if you want to chime in.
Well, I think you're right. Asia, Japan, South Korea are going to benefit enormously from a more diverse LNG supply portfolio. Australia is going to add 50 tons to the marketplace in the next 5 years. The U.S. is going to add, what do we know, 40, 50 million tons. So it's going to be much more diversified. That reduces that Gulf dependence, Qatar dependence, and also gives them leverage on Russian supplies and prices. So I think that's a good thing. The big offshore conventional LNG projects like Australia has coming online, they're going to be deeply challenged in a world where, let's say, oil prices settle at $75 a barrel, just for the sake of discussion. That's going to, along with other price trends in LNG, suggest a price for LNG in Asia, which is at best break even for the big projects offshore Australia, and possibly not break even. So any new ones, I think, are dead in the water for the time being, unless we see prices come up pretty dramatically. There's other LNG pricing dynamics, that are happening on that price side as well. So the big new ones are dead in the water until something breaks loose on that because of the cost.
Mr. Ambassador, you may be right that the ultimate costs are similar, but the financial risk profile are very different between unconventional gas production and kind of high upfront capital costs, long lead time projects that you have in Australia. And of course, those projects have been going through, up until recently, cost inflation rates that would be very hard to sustain and make them financially attractive, even before the price of oil collapsed. That's been a problem for Australia. The other impact possibly on Australia, where you have these very expensive projects offshore, high cost, long lead time, is that to a certain extent, projects like that to be financeable needs long-term take-or-pay obligations prices that are more or less indexed to oil. When America start exporting LNG for the first time, all of a sudden you will have volumes that have no relationship with oil prices at all, the point that Mr. Chen mentioned. And you might see the so far three very distinct global markets, the one in North America, the one in Europe, and the one in Asia, start to converge in pricing once America starts exporting LNG. So that adds another level of uncertainty on what future looks like. But your country has a sufficiently robust portfolio already of new LNG projects that those will, as Mike suggests, will go. But what it looks like for the future, it adds a level of uncertainty.
We have another question. Stefan, up in front.
Yes, I wanted to ask, what is perceived now as a revolution in the short term? Do you think it has a risk of being perceived as, in the long term, as some kind of a die-hard conservative standoff somehow, with investments that could be seen as counterproductive? Typically, we will see a lot of ghost towns in parts of the U.S. We'll see infrastructure which will not environmentally, there is the environmental cost, of course, and also in terms of missed opportunities to switch to other technologies which are maybe more sustainable. So that cost is not taken into account.
So Stefan's raising, I think, a really interesting point about sort of the spillover impact of this, and also whether or not these wells are in fact profitable depends on, to some extent, the price, right? The price environment, the market environment, and whether the price is good enough for this kind of, and the productivity of these wells. So what about the criticism of this? Ed, you shake your head.
No, I mean, I think the assumptions are false, right? I mean, it is a revolution because high prices, as Mr. Chen again mentioned, or Mike, $13 per million BTU gas led to a revolution that now allows us to perfect the technology over time where you can produce gas at $2.50 and still make money. In the long run, people will stop doing things if they don't make money. So it is a revolution. Does the revolution, and it may be $100 oil that led to the tight oil revolution. But we will produce a certain amount of tight oil at $60 oil price, and we'll produce more at $80 oil price. The fact that you're not tapping a much larger resource base with technology that was not applied in the same way before makes it a revolution. Now, does the revolution have, bad impacts? Every revolution has bad impacts. I mean, the move from coal to oil led to a dislocation in the economy. Turns out that oil was cleaner and more efficient than the coal that it displays. So, will it have impacts? This is a resource industry that goes through boom and bust cycles. Ghost town is not a recent invention. There are all kinds of ghost towns in Nevada that I can take you to that are good tourist attraction nowadays. So, I mean, to underestimate a revolution because it has certain, perhaps unintended impact is not to say that a revolution didn't take place. It just means that you have to manage those unintended impacts. You have to always, continue to improve your social license to operate in order to sustain that production. So I don't really understand the argument of saying that it's not a revolution because bad things happen.
Just as there is this argument that this huge, I heard one environmentalist say, what will save us from this massive surge of natural gas production? When from the industry perspective, natural gas is a hell of a lot better than coal or oil, to the extent we can compete against oil and with natural gas. So there is this argument that so much natural gas is going to cut into development of renewables and other kinds of, and we already have cases where nuclear plants are being shut down in the U.S. Because it's too expensive to retrofit them when they have to compete with $2 or $3 natural gas generated electricity. And probably there's cases where it might be backing out or at least preventing renewable developments. And that gets you into that, natural gas, it's much cleaner than coal in every way, cleaner than oil, when we can compete in that. Is gas a transition fuel to a sustainable, renewable future? Because it's a 20, 30-year scaling process for renewables. Is it a transition fuel, or as the industry likes to say, a destination fuel? So it's going to always be a huge part of the mix. And, that you can debate that. But I think there is a debate about that these days.
Philip, you wanted to chime in
Well,
on
just to say, I think it depends where you are. Depends on your fuel mix. And clearly in China and India with 60, 70% coal in the mix, anything is better, anything that eats into coal is good news. I would argue that, as I've mentioned before, the US may be getting cleaner, but you've shoveled your dirt over to us, so we're not particularly
We don't,
grateful.
Philip, we don't actually force Europeans to buy our coal.
But since we're bankrupt, we have no choice. So I think it depends where you are. And certainly in Britain, my country, though I'm not living there, this is a debate. We've been at last, for years trying to get wind energy going. It's just about coming, and you've got shale gas and oil supposedly there. You've got landowners and villagers who don't want it anywhere near them, the NIMBY. So the argument there is very much more balanced than in the US for good and bad reasons. So I think you might see the UK actually deciding not to pursue the shale gas option. But so each country, I think, will pursue it in a different way depending on their politics and their fuel mix. I think in China, absolutely essential. We're not going to wait for 5 billion windmills to be built. We haven't got enough time.
Just for factual clarification, I mean, the United States is a very diverse country, and states generally make those policies rather than the federal government. So in New York State, where the Marcellus Shale also extends to, we have a shale gas ban in New York State. So it's not entirely uniform, but generally speaking, much more affordable gas is displacing coal when old coal-fired power plants get displaced. The investment in renewables continue in the United States, and they've been increasing in share. That's a much better situation than in Germany, where renewables are basically displacing nuclear, the decline in nuclear power in Germany, and where in Germany emissions are actually increasing recently because of coal consumption increasing in Germany. So those policy needs to be managed by something like a carbon tax or some other way of providing the market conditions to allow renewables, wind and solar to thrive. That's an argument that can very well be made.
Chung Wei-dong, some renewable issues also came up. What's the healthy mix in China, and whatever else you have on your mind is?
Actually, currently the world is two revolutions. Energy revolution happens. One is US, shale and Thai oil, or unconventional energy revolution. Another one leading Germany and North Europe. Yeah, they banning nuclear, banning fossil. Yeah, last month, very big impact about the sun blocked by
The
by
the eclipse.
They measured how the solar power down and what will be replaced. Yeah, it's two revolution. No matter how we talk about the shale gas revolution, actually still fossil,
Right.
still fossil fuel. So another revolution actually also is going on. But we are still mainly based on the fossil fuel. So American Revolution become quite, more obviously especially China. We need more shale gas productions. Actually, shale gas revolution is driven by three things mainly. One is technology. Second, the finance model. Third, business model. The three things plus together. Yeah?
Right.
US, for the energy resources speaking, not big pie, not occupy big pie in the world. Only about 3% oil reserve in the world. China, quite similar, 2.5 something, 2.6% of the resources. According to the petrogeology theory, any place you have the conventional oil and gas, you have the unconventional. 80% resources is within the unconventional. So if the technology is there, the cost will affordable, that can be continued. Even though two revolutions happen in the world, but the fossil fuel still dominant for another 40 to 50 years. So it's remarkable that the US revolution is not based on the natural resources richness in US. It's really depend on technology, finance model, and the business model. Drive that. So make lots of countries, especially China, India, some major consumer country want to learn from that. Try to reduce our high carbon emission energy like coal. Yeah, the smoke. China, Beijing very seriously. May here feel also as well. But luckily, I read some newspaper a few days ago. Beijing is not the worst city.
New Delhi.
New Delhi
is
even
worse.
double. Even double. So the shale gas or unconventional energy, oil gas revolution is still really helpful for the major developing and the major oil and gas consuming countries.
Yeah, I mean, what you touched on, a lot of what you touched on, goes well with the US EIA's recent rollout of the annual energy outlook, where they kind of say similar things in terms of how you see the sort of the energy mix. Fossil fuels still playing a very big role for transport, but a lot of the growth in sort of power generation coming from two sources, namely gas from these tight sources, and also from renewables. Those two sources being where all the new where new power is going to be generated for the next 15, 20 years. So a lot of what you say about what's going on in China and how China sees this is very similar to the way that it seems the government in the U.S. sees its energy profile moving forward. So that's kind of interesting. Any more questions? But before we go on to question, I had a question, one that always comes up when we have discussions about this. What about Middle East and the U.S. position going forward in the Middle East? Does this mean a change in terms of U.S. posturing and approach to Middle East? And what about China? And Chen Weidong, you talked about sort of China being in this nice, cozy position between Middle East and Russia, competing for the Chinese market. How does China see its role going forward in Middle East? Middle East, it seems to me, is another. I mean, there's some pent-up supply there. If you look at the Iran deal, for instance, if the Iran deal happens at the end of June, that's quite a bit of new supply. The impact that it will have on the oil market. What about Libya? If things were to stabilize in Libya, how does that impact the market? I mean, there are these market implications, and then on the other side, what is U.S. posturing in terms of its security and geopolitical positioning in that vis-a-vis that region. Mike, let's start with you, Mike.
Well, I think probably the biggest winner ultimately in the shale or tight oil episode and low price episode, the big winner is going to be Saudi Arabia and its partners Kuwait and Abu Dhabi, because they can produce oil at the lowest cost of anybody. Yes, they're living with some revenue problems or revenue shortages for a few years now. But ultimately what it's doing is reconcentrating our supply dependence on these big, low-cost Gulf producers. And that's exactly what the Saudis intend with this unwillingness to cede market share. And they're willing to sit with very low prices. So I think the Saudis and their Gulf allies will be the big winners, and we will still have to worry about what's happening in that triangle of Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Iraq will remain critical. The Iran issue, if Iran oil comes back, that's going to weigh on the market next year and maybe the year after. So maybe you got lower for longer is what a lot of people are talking about. What happens in Iraq, security is enormously uncertain. But ultimately, the Saudis are going to be the big beneficiaries because control of the marketplace will come back to them because they will be the largest incremental producer.
So in terms of the region's importance from U.S. national interest standpoint, still fairly going to be important going forward?
I think, James, objectively speaking, it should be the same, right? Because it is the most important oil-producing region in the world. It's the cheapest production, as Mike said. It's got the largest capability to continue to produce for the longest time. Our traditional trading partners are dependent on oil from the Middle East. So in a world where we worry about what's happening to Greece, America is not going to stop thinking about the importance of the Middle East. But that's objectively speaking, right? I mean, psychologically, emotionally, the American public's acceptance of American intervention in the Middle East, particularly after the last couple of misadventures, might be quite different, given our very different import posture than before. So and therefore, there's more likelihood that America would think that this may, if it's important to the world, maybe this is a shared responsibility over time than one that America is singly responsible for. So it kind of cuts a little bit the other direction as well. In terms of American import sources, the thing that people don't talk about is the fact that America, that used to import a lot of West African crude oil, is no longer importing West African crude oil. And that has to do with the quality of the oil that comes out of the tight oil formations, light sweet oil, that we needed for gasoline production, primarily on the East Coast. We are hardly importing any West African or North African crude oil anymore. So that's where America's import position has changed the most, actually. So you ask yourself, would AFRICOM have been created today versus 10 years ago or so when it was created? It's a counterfactual that's interesting to ponder. But in terms of the Middle East, you would hope that America would not take its eye off that ball, but stranger things have happened.
Well, just a simple response to that. The U.S. approach to the Middle East has already changed. Look at the ISIS discussion about what to do about ISIS. No boots on the ground was a mantra in the Congress and elsewhere. No boots on the ground. Find another way to do this. Bombing, whatever it is, drones, but no boots on the ground. That's a fundamental shift in U.S. approach, willingness to engage, willingness to spend blood and treasure. So it's already happened in a general way. The question then becomes, if you take that forward, hegemony fatigue, all kinds of other things operating in the U.S. A new strategy, what that's going to be. But we're clearly, at least at the margins, dialing down our approach, our willingness to really engage on the ground with.
Philip?
Coming from Southeast Asia, how does that tie into the naval interests in the Indian Ocean, the sea lanes? Let's not go to the South China Sea, but just talk about the Indian Ocean. Do you see that changing?
Yeah, I'll toot our own. We've got a report coming out, NVR, in just the next week or so that focuses very, very much on these questions. And importantly, on what China's role could be, should be, collaborative role in the sea lanes, in particular in the Gulf. But the boots on the ground is one dimension. The sea lanes is an easier one to stay with because you don't have people getting shot by snipers in Baghdad. So I think the U.S. will stay with a lot of its engagement on the sea lanes, but it needs help from, or at least collaboration from China.
That's where I was going to go, actually.
From the Indians and the Japanese, which raises a whole other set of diplomatic challenges, which you can only imagine.
Well, 3 of the 4 guys ganging up on you to talk about shared responsibility. So you got to say something,
Okay,
can
get
we,
to
Don?
say
So
something.
what do you think? China sees this as a shared responsibility issue, or is this something else that China's national interest doesn't align with?
This become a quite serious issue we discussing heavily internally, government and the thinking tankers, including myself. Recently, I reviewed the past 100 years change in Middle East about geopolitical situation. From British, France, the colony system, to the Cold War, Soviet Union, US. Then US alone, since after 70. But 2 Iraq war really make American lose most of the credibilities in the area. You see recently, Netanyahu with US, the president didn't receive him. That's very rare. And also he make a strong speaker in the Congress. And he win the home election. That, can you imagine 20 years ago? No. So recently, the Saudi leader ally bombing Yemen. That also unthinkable 20 years ago. So this area is really changed that into a totally new era. 100 years ago, always someone strong out of the region controlled the situation in the area. But now, suddenly, no one can control, or no one willing to get into control. So China also in very difficult situation. We heavily depend on the import oil from there. We get 60% of the oil. Half our LNG import from the area. Korea even higher, 90%. Japan, 90-some percent. But that political unstable situation is happens. For the last 5 years, by trading, developed very quick, China and the Gulf country, annual 30% increase annually, 30% increase annually in the last 5 years. But politically speaking, we have no influence there. Investment, we almost none there, but we have a lot of people there.
That China has
So, how we deal with that? Have no solution yet. But that is the picture. We can draw that out. So just like Mike said, how China, US, Japan, Korea, the demander, the leader, the rising power, how the big coordinate properly with the local. That's a really complex place. American take over control or influences over there 50 years. Now it's feel really difficult. Should leave? So stay? Or how we stay? How can leave? No solution. So it's resources very rich there, over 60%. The oil reserves there. 1/3 the oil produced there. If they really go to the unconventional, they can even go higher. If really the sanction open, released for Iran, that even higher. The productions.
That's right.
So, but we have no solution yet. We may next year we may open the premium for that.
Well, we got at least one good person worrying about it and working on it.
Very
so
difficult. Very
that's
difficult.
a good thing.
Very difficult.
So we have time for one last question, and that would be all. So don't hold back. This is your last chance. So we have a hand over here.
I'm from the Korea Times. So I would like to know the implications on what we say the U.S.-China rivalry in East Asia, because someone in the panel said that the both countries actually have a shared interest in shale. Then does this mean that the U.S.-China tensions in East Asia will be eased because of this shale gas production?
Well, let's try to make this really short because we got 3 minutes. But I guess another way to frame that is, what kind of cooperation or collaboration is there, if any at all, between China and U.S. on sort of maybe, technological development or development of shale plays in China, potentially? Any?
Let me say a few words about this. I see the energy cooperation between the countries in 4 levels. First level is about oil and gas flow. We import or we sell gas and oil to the other countries. Second is about the finance, the money flow. Third is the technology information flow. The fourth is about the human resources, technology, the thinking tank communications. China and the US are very interesting. We do not have the first layer of the flow. We do not import any oil, any gas from US. But we have a very active in the another 3rd levels investment. In last 10 years, Chinese investment on American shale gas and Thai oil over $50 billion. $50 billion last 5 years. The communication, the informations, the technology sharing or JV, quite a many. The shale gas in China, actually lots of American technologies there. Also, the people communication. Our 3, as the panelists in many cases, in US, in China, here, yeah? Even with you together, yeah, we are quite so. But China with Russia, we have only first layer, oil and gas import. We with Middle East has only the first layer, no other 3. So China with other countries are not fully cooperated yet because we only have something missed between our corporations.
All right. Well, the Q lady says, time's up. And that's all for now. Thank you, panelists, for that wonderful discussion. And I would ask the audience to join me in applauding them for their input and presentation.